Welcome, everyone. My name is Helen Lang, and I'm the chair of SFU's Department of Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies. I'm also the convener of this year's President Dream Colloquium, and I would like to welcome all of you to our final public event, A Conversation with Dana Claxton. Before we start the event, I would just like to first acknowledge that I am privileged to be connecting in from my home in downtown Vancouver, which is on the unceded traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. And I invite you to acknowledge and reflect on your relation to the land you're connecting from in the chat, if you like. Now, it's my honor to invite Elder Margaret George from the Swahili First Nation to share a blessing with us.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to come and join with us during this time. And welcome to the territory of the First Nations people, the Musqueam, Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam. Just a quick prayer for you. Great Spirit, thank you for bringing us together today. Just guide each and every one of us on the path that we're on, thanking our communities for allowing us to do the work that we do, and our families for the time that we're not with them. I ask Great Spirit just to clear our paths, give us strength, and give us courage. I ask Great Spirit also to bless the little ones who are witnessing what we are doing, and just keep our families safe, all my relations.
I want to thank Elder Margaret for her prayer and warm wishes. Now, this year's President Dream Colloquium is titled From Conversations to Action, Creating from Social Justice Research. And it's made possible by generous funding from the President's Office and with the wonderful support and collaboration of the Office of Graduate and Postdoctoral Studies, SFU Public Square, and the Department of Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies, which is celebrating 50 years of teaching social justice issues at SFU. For this year's colloquium, we are really happy to be able to invite back 4 speakers who previously held the Ruth, Wynn, Woodward Endowed Chair in Women's Studies, the first ever Endowed Chair to be established at SFU. On this great occasion, it is my pleasure to invite our president, Dr. Joy Johnson, to say a few words about the colloquium.
Well, thank you so much, Helen. It's such a pleasure to be here this afternoon, and thank you, Elder Margaret, for your wonderful welcome. I want to acknowledge that I'm privileged to be joining you today from the beautiful unceded traditional territories of the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, the Musqueam, and the Coquitlam peoples. And I'm so delighted to be here for the final episode of the President's Dream Colloquium, From Conversations to Action, Creating from Social Justice Research. I'm excited about today's event, a conversation with Dana Claxton. I want to welcome all of you for joining us today. This is the first time that this colloquium program has been delivered virtually, and we're so glad that you could join us. The Dream Colloquium was launched in 2012, and it was created to develop a forum for interdisciplinary engagement amongst our SFU students, faculty, and staff, as well as the broader communities that we serve. And these colloquia focus on themes of interest to the university, and in this case, social justice. The colloquium includes a combination of public events and student seminars, and this series is slightly different from what it has been in the past, as we're excited to be presenting a more interactive conversational format, and I really enjoyed this format. I think it's been really engaging. Students will be learning through the colloquium from leading social justice advocates about how they have made an impact, and they're going to help them develop their own creative ways to move from conversation to action. The semester includes 18 students from diverse disciplines, including gender, sexuality and women's studies, resource and environmental management, contemporary arts, education, and urban studies. And they're all enrolled for credit in the colloquium. They have opportunities to learn not only from faculty members and guest speakers, but I think importantly, also from each other. By promoting interdisciplinary, evidence-based dialogue on important topics, the Dream Colloquium reflects SFU's vision to be Canada's engaged university while providing rewarding, inspiring, and interdisciplinary student experiences. So we're delighted to present today's conversation with a very special guest, Dana Claxton, who is critically acclaimed acclaimed international exhibiting artist. She works in film, video, photography, single and multi-channel video installation and performance art. Her practice investigates Indigenous beauty, the body, the socio-political, and the spiritual. She mentors Indigenous youth, emerging artists and filmmakers as well. And her work's been shown in museums and galleries throughout the USA, Canada, and Australia. She's head and an associate professor in the Department of Art History, Visual Art and Theory with the University of British Columbia. And her family reserve is Wood Mountain Lakota First Nations, located in Southwest Saskatchewan. And she resides in Vancouver, Canada. A previous SFU, Ruth, Wynn, Woodward Endowed Chair, we're so excited to welcome you back to SFU. This colloquium series, as was mentioned, also celebrates 50 years of the Department of Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies at SFU. And I think that's just a remarkable achievement. It's been 50 years since SFU offered its first course in women's studies, and that course was entitled The Geography of Gender. So we stand on the shoulders of so many scholars who have built gender, sexuality, and women's studies into what it is today, a really groundbreaking, cutting-edge, interdisciplinary department. So I really want to wish a hearty congratulations on this incredible milestone. I want to thank the faculty and staff members who conceived of the colloquium and who have worked so hard to make it possible. The colloquium partners include Graduate and Postdoctoral Studies, Department of Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies, as I've mentioned, SFU Public Square as well. I want to also thank Stevie Benish and Stacy Makartoff from the Graduate Studies Office, as well as the Dean and Associate Provost Jeff Dirksen and the Associate Dean Roxanne Panchazi for helping organize this 14th President's Dream Colloquium. And on this final lecture, I also want to give a very special thank you to Helen for all the work that she's put into hosting and helping put this incredible colloquium together. So thank you so much, Helen. So you're going to have an opportunity to share your ideas and questions during the conversation, and I encourage everyone to do that. So with that, I'll hand the floor back to you, Helen, to continue with the program.
Thank you, Joy, so much for your kind and encouraging words. So before I formally introduce our special guest, Professor Dana Claxton, I would like to first give you a brief rundown of our event and remind you of our community guidelines. Now, you can submit your questions for our speaker after her presentation using the Q&A function. A student from our colloquium, Alan Valancourt, who is currently pursuing a master's degree in graduate liberal studies and is a development strategist working for the City of Vancouver, will be our moderator. She's working with a team of other colloquium students behind the scenes, and they will be reminding you of the details of the Q&A at the start and also on the chat. You are welcome and encouraged to use the chat function throughout the event, but please observe our community guidelines and be respectful citizens. Closed captioning is available if you click on the CC button at the bottom. Now, finally, there will be a draw for prizes generously provided by SFU's alumni office before we finish. So do make sure you stay to the very end and see if you get lucky. It is now my great pleasure to welcome Dana Claxton back to SFU, where she held the Ruth Wynn Woodward Endowed Chair in Women's Studies from 2009 to 2010. As Joy has mentioned, Dana's family reserve is the Wood Mountain Lakota First Nation. Now, she is a truly award-winning and multidisciplinary artist who's worked in an intersecting medium from film, video, photography, installation to performance art. Her work has been shown in prestigious venues throughout the world, including the Museum of Modern Art and the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, the Sundance Film Festival, and the Museum of Contemporary Art in Sydney, amongst many others. Her work is also held in public and private collections throughout Canada, including at the National Gallery of Canada and the Vancouver Art Gallery. She has received many prestigious awards, including most recently the 2020 Governor General's Award in Visual and Media Arts and the 2020 Scotia Bank Award in Photography. And aside from all of that, she's also an associate professor and working as a head of department at UBC. So please join me in extending a very warm welcome to Dana Claxton.
Hello, thank you everyone. It's great to be here. Today I'm on the ancestral unceded territory of the Tsleil-Waututh people on the North Shore, and I'm very grateful to be here. I want to thank all the prayer that was offered. I'm very grateful for that, as well as the president and you, Helen, and everybody that I've worked with for the last number of months in preparation for this talk. And also all of you who are joining us today and the students. A couple of things is just hearing that, you know, the department's been celebrating its 50th anniversary, its birthday. I want to say well wishes and happy birthday for that. It was a cutting edge program when it started, and it continues to be, as well as the Ruth Woodward chair is, you know, that was a time for me that was at this trajectory of my career. I had, you know, been an artist for a number of years and living quite an artist life from grant to grant, or from, you know, sailed to a museum. And then I had decided to go back to school thinking about perhaps teaching. And I had taught at Emily Carr for a number of years. And I'm also actually an alumni of SFU in the Liberal Studies Department. And I did also do a partial undergraduate degree and took women's studies actually in the 80s. That really changed my perspective of women's issues. So I'm going to share my screen. Bear with me. Let's see here. Share. And I'm going to go play. So, you know, I'm thinking about what art does. What is the capacity of art, and what is art doing is something that I ask you to think about. What is art doing? You know, and what do we hope art does? You know, contemporary art is very demanding. And also people demand a great deal from art. They want to be sometimes even entertained. You know, art is not within the entertainment realm. They want to be pleased. You know, they want to aesthetically be overwhelmed. They want to be in awe. They want all of these things from art. But sometimes art doesn't deliver all of those things. And I'm thinking about particularly my own practice and its relationship to ideas of social justice. And myself as an Indigenous woman, as a mixed race woman, a number of my themes have looked at the representation of Indigenous women as well as men through my photography and film and video installations, and also dramatic films as well. So with this particular work, Headdress, as I was thinking about a number of things, about the politics around the headdress, as you know. Oh, goodness, I don't want my phone to be ringing right now. Put it on mute. Thinking about the politics around who gets to wear a headdress. And as we know, there was many conversations of these, what are they called, raves, and people coming wearing headdresses. They're actually called, in my culture, war bonnets. And they're meant, they're very serious headgear. You know, for one, they're made from eagle feathers, which, as you know, probably most of you know that Indigenous people revere the eagle for its sight and its vision, and how it can see and how it can glide and how high it can be in the sky. So we have great reverence for the eagle, and war bonnets are made from these eagle feathers. So this is a play on that. So I call these headdresses, but it's also a play on the adornment of Indigenous jewelry. And whenever I wear my Indigenous jewelry, people actually reach out to touch me and, want to know who is this, who made it, what is it? And, and sometimes it's a little bit too close, right? So there's different things at play here. So it's the headdress, women's jewelry, Indigenous women, but she sees you. So this work is not about the veil per se. She can see us metaphorically, looking through the veil. So it's also thinking about Indigenous women's looking, not necessarily the gaze, but that she is looking back and she's being seen. If we think of erasure and those kind of things with Indigenous history. Oops, there's something else popped up on my screen here. I hope you don't have it on your screen. I can't see exactly what you're saying. So I did a number of, a series of the headdress and asked different women I know to bring in their cultural belongings from their collections. And so this was a work, this is called Janine, and she's from the north in the Yukon Territory. And so what is interesting about beadwork is that it's very specific of where you're from. And then there's some hybridity going on nowadays, but generally it's very specific. And so we can see some of the floral patterns in her designs. Those are very much from the Yukon region. She's Gretchen from Old Crow. I wish I could get rid of that thing that says set up professional audio. I really hope you're not seeing it. I can't get rid of it at the moment. So born as a collective woman. So I did a series of banners. I was teaching a graduate class. I called them the Gramsci seminars. Antonio Gramsci, who was this really interesting Italian philosopher who was jailed for his beliefs. He was a communist. I suppose people thought he was threatening, and he was actually quite a frail little man in some ways, but his mind was so interesting. So I read a number of his books. They're called the Notebooks from Prison. And then I would take his ideas and sort of twist them and turn them. And so this was a series based on some of his ideas, born as a collective woman, thinking about the Indigenous commons, tribalism, our systems of governance, and whether here on the West Coast, it's the potlatch. Within my own culture, it's the wopila, where you give. It's the giveaway. So you're constantly giving back to the community. It's a reciprocal relationship, and what the collective is, but also a responsibility to that collective. So I did a number of banners. And so also thinking of twisting the words. So he used the term luxury mammal. So sort of in the time where he was writing was sort of women of gentry, women of privilege. But the trained guerrilla was the worker generally on the shop floor on the assembly line. So I took those two ideas. The luxury mammal seeks a trained guerrilla. So I'm, being kind of cheeky here. And also red on red, I have used the color red a lot in my work, thinking about red power, the sacred red color within the medicine wheel, as well as within our offerings that we make. Red cloth is very important to us. Understand your historical values. This was also thinking about, if we think of, Canada being this settler nation, a treaty nation, a country that has this enormous, difficult history, but also this, amazing country that we have, that people can, from all over the world come here seeking, a type of autonomy, sometimes denied within their own countries. But if we think about the formation of Canada and the denial of Indigenous rights and the criminalization of Indigenous culture, and Indigenous people, if you have read the Indian Act, many things that were disallowed to Indigenous people, and of course residential schools, and those things still impact our social relations, unfortunately, as well as still harm our communities. But at the same time, of course, there's hope, there's amazing things going on. So it's this duality that's complicated. It's complicated sometimes to be an Indigenous person, and I think a Canadian, a newcomer or a settler. So this is understand your historical value, thinking for myself and Indigenous women, understanding our historical value and always bringing that forward. this is when the work has been on exhibition, banners being set up at a gallery, and just another look at them. And they've been in all kinds of configurations these works have been in. Thinking about also Lakota beadwork and Wood Mountain beadwork in my own family reserve. And so these are very specific Wood Mountain beadwork and Wood Mountain moccasins. If anybody's lucky, you know, we're privileged enough to have a pair of Wood Mountain moccasins. These were all made by Grace Pegan. And so I've done a series with them, and just, you know, when I look at them, if we think of the aesthetic properties of art, and so also what I've realized, what I've been doing with my work is wanting to bring in an Indigenous aesthetic and sometimes a very traditional Indigenous aesthetic into contemporary art discourse. And so this is I call this stack, and you can see towards the end, there's a stack of these lovely moccasins, Wood Mountain beadwork. And I had the opportunity with the Burrard Arts Foundation to project them onto the Vancouver Art Gallery. It was just lovely to see. You know, the beads were at least, I think each bead, you know, because of being projected and blown up, were about 12 inches each. So again, thinking of sort of indigenizing this, all these movements of indigenizing the academy, indigenizing education. So this was sort of indigenizing this colonial architecture. Also, this was part of an installation. There's a single channel video installation. You can see a woman in the distance crawling, and then she's upright here, and it's called, this is called Cultural Belonging. And again, bringing in both, I'll go back to this one. You can sort of see on the larger, as I call them, fire boxes, they're called light boxes, but bringing in this sort of enormous cultural history that, you know, that my, you know, family has, that most Indigenous people have. You know, we're sort of tied to this brilliant history, this oppressive history, this dynamic history, and then we're also contemporary people, and we're heading into the future. So that's what this image represents. But the one of her crawling in her red jumpsuit, and it's sort of like a worker's kind of jumpsuit, it's about the kind of struggle that people are subjected to, you know, and sometimes you have to have incredible will, if you can locate your will, to overcome great social injustices. And so it's considering these things. And there she is crawling. She called for 20 minutes, a woman that I've worked with for many, many years. It was very generous for her to do this work for me. And I've worked with her. I think I've worked with her for 30 years. I've made a lot of work with her, and she trusts me, and I'm very grateful. So here's a larger image of that called Cultural Belonging. So you can see she's got this trail of Indigenous aesthetics. So I'm always also wanting to bring, as I mentioned, Indigenous aesthetics into the discourse of art instead of within the realm of primitivism, because with so many sort of the academy, the university has been implicated in dehumanizing Indigenous people through research. So we've had to turn that around within so many disciplines. Some still haven't quite caught up, but with visual art, you know, the whole area of primitivism has been problematic. So I brought in all kinds of Indigenous cultural belongings. So she's this figure, call her a character, this actor, is bringing all of this history with her. She's wearing her beautiful elk robe, but she's moving forward. She's got her headdress on. She's got these amazing shoes on. And so it's sort of this, you know, it's meant to consider these enormous histories. So yeah, so thinking, what is art doing? What does art have the capacity to do? And in my case, and in much contemporary, Indigenous contemporary art, it's bringing in stories, there's storytelling of particular histories, bringing in Indigenous aesthetics, and bringing that into not only art history, but within realms of justice, because so much of it's interesting, so much of contemporary art is looking at the brutalities of history and aestheticizing it, bringing it into the gallery space for viewers to look at, to think, oh, what's going on in that painting? Whether it's a painting thinking about land claims or clear cuts or fishing, or in my case, looking at the Indigenous female and those histories. So art is asking a lot, but it's also giving a lot. So I think I'll end there. I hope you didn't get that one. Oh, there's my timer. And I'm going to stop the share and finally get rid of that little sign. So that's where I'm stopping for today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dana. That was just the most lovely presentation and so thought-provoking. I'm really pleased and honored to be here on behalf of the President's Dream Colloquium series to ask you a number of questions. So just kind of circling back on what you were saying, you know, that it's sometimes, you know, Indigenous art is kind of dehumanizing people through research, like looking at cultural belonging. Do debates and discussion in the academic world change the context of what you do and what you've done as an artist?
One thing about dehumanization is that I was referring to that research has dehumanized Indigenous people, not contemporary Indigenous art, just to make that, just so I'm clear on what I was saying. And that, but I would say also, so has some historical art dehumanized Indigenous bodies. I mean, historical art has been, you know, has also, you know, kind of objectified, you know, the female body as well, right? So, so that's one thing, is that I think historically art proper has been implicated in creating images that could be stereotypical. But with contemporary Indigenous art, and also historical Indigenous art as well, because art making is also, and not that it's always about the biography of the artist, but often people are bringing forward self, they're bringing forward community, they're bringing forward self-representation. And so art brings forward these interior worlds of the artist and sometimes their culture. So there's a type of rehumanization. So there's a type of rehumanization going on. If we think of, I mean, even though some early literature, the newspaper, I mean, there's been, you know, much research done on sort of constructing the imaginary Indian through visual culture. And so I think that contemporary Indigenous art has rehumanized Indigenous people in some ways.
Mm-hmm. And in creating decolonial art, does that mean that there are challenges for recognition in the colonial context of the art world? And in what way or how do you think that recognition matters?
That's a great question. Thank you. You know, I think, say like in the 60s, 70s, I mean, you know, Indigenous people didn't even have the vote in Canada, so not having the vote, I mean, how was our work being viewed? It was still within these primitive, you know, frameworks. And, but certainly the gallery space, I would argue, would be my position. The museum and the gallery space, especially in Canada, has been one of the sites for the most critical engagement of contemporary Indigenous art, because some of it has, you know, been very challenging in the best possible way of looking at these fraught histories. And so in Canada, those colonial museums have had to take us on and sometimes not always with welcomed arms and open doors. You know, I mean, there was groups that were, you know, banging on the door saying, let us in, like let our artwork in, not within primitive frameworks, but let our artwork in based on that it is art. And so there's been great debates. The art world has had great theoretical debates about visual culture, aesthetics, and the history of art. So Canada's been a leader in showing Indigenous art, but somehow it's still, you know, there's still an imbalance, but it's been a leader.
Thank you. And we've got a question from our virtual audience asking, do you have a particular genre that you prefer working with? You work with so many. And then connected to that question, does photography do something as art that is different from performance art?
You know, I seem to like all mediums, but I haven't painted yet. And sometimes I think when I'm old, I'll paint. So it should be any day now, right? I'm going to start to paint. But you know, I've always liked photography. I've been taking pictures since I was very young, and I had my first Canon AE1 when I was 16. So I've been taking pictures for a long time. And but in terms of, you know, there's picture taking, and then there's making art with the camera. And so, you know, that came along a little bit later. Sorry, what was the rest of the question?
Yeah, let's see. How do you decide which genre to work with when you're approaching a project? Is it something that just kind of sparks inside, or, you know, you feel a natural call to pursue a certain medium? How does that work for you?
It's like, you know, it's like the mind's eye. So, you know, sort of where your spirit is taking you into your mind's eye. And, you know, with many of those images that I showed, and with mostly all of my photographs, is I see it in my mind and then go about constructing it. So, you know, because it's, you know, whether it's, you know, thinking of who to work with, sets, props, and costumes, you know, lighting, and those kind of things, backdrops. So it's really, you see it, and then you bring it forward. But in terms of genre, is that, you know, I'm somewhat of a surrealist, and, you know, I hadn't really realized that until, you know, all of my films, which are my dramatic fractured narrative experimental films, are quite surreal, and some images that I make are surreal as well.
Thank you. And I guess just a thought as I was thinking about these questions and your answer to this particular one. Do you create for a specific audience? Like if you've exhibited at MoMA and at the Met and, you know, the National Gallery, does that in some ways dictate the medium that you're using, or it's the other way around? First is the creation, and then comes the showing.
You art, for me, you make the work, and, you know, and then you make the work, and, you know, and if you have the, you know, good fortune, and you work hard, you know, the curators eventually come around. You know, but also in Canada, which is also unique, is we have about 180 artist-run centers. And so there's been a real shift of artists also curating. So I was a curator at an artist-run center, is how I got acquainted with the Vancouver art scene. And so artists can also make opportunities for themselves. You know, at one point it was, you know, waiting for the, you know, not waiting for, but it was like this sort of hierarchical, you know, artist, you know, being discovered by the, you know, the curator or the art historian, where now it's more, I think, horizontal, and that artists can make opportunities for themselves.
Oh, lovely. And another question from our virtual audience: what was your art life like as a child?
Well, that's a great question. You know, I mean, I guess my older siblings always tell me that I like to sing and dance. And my sister's a painter. She's an artist as well. She has a gallery in Saskatchewan. And, you know, but I was a bit of a late bloomer, but I often think that it was really, the enormity of the sky being in Saskatchewan, and just that horizon, it was infinity. You tell as far as you could see, you could, as far as you could see wherever you looked, the Great Plains. And so often my photography, especially when I'm shooting in the studio, reflects infinity. So I think I was affected by certainly the land in Saskatchewan, and my overall aesthetics, sort of my how I'm looking at how I started to look was, with a relationship with what I thought was infinity.
Mhm. You've really tapped a piece of my heart, because I was born in Manitoba, just outside, on the outskirts of Winnipeg in the country. And so I have a long time memory of sitting on a fence post waiting for my brother to come home from elementary school on the bus and seeing the wheat fields just blow forever and ever. So yeah, that's really beautiful. How do you understand beauty, kind of touching on that, outside of being just aesthetically pleasing?
That's a great question too. Well, I think there's the politics. I mean, there's the politics of everything, right? And so there's the politics of beauty, because if we think of sort of Western beauty standards, I mean, but it's also for me of looking at what is Indigenous beauty. And if we think of primitivism, or some early languages of describing Indigenous life, and which was a very, very beautiful life. And so, and everything, and still people who make regalia, if we think of in the day, that those clothes were worn, those were your everyday clothes that were the embellishments of the kind of quill work, the kind of weaving, the kind of here, I'm just looking at my backyard of all the cedar. Everything here was made from cedar: hats, shoes, bedding, clothing. And so it's thinking of that type of Indigenous beauty, and those embellishments, and bringing those forward. So I think I'm interested in the politics of beauty, and that beauty does not just belong to sort of this, Greco history, or it doesn't just belong to one group. And, because beauty is a problematic word, because it's often tied with judgment and, and taste and class and all of these things. But I think that beauty belongs to everybody, and everybody has their own beauty.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. You noted in an interview, if I'm not mistaken, that you consider yourself a supernaturalist. Could you explain a little bit more what you might mean by that?
Well, thinking about that, we think of, well, infinity for one, or if we think of, the sort of billions of planets that are out there, and think of spirit, right? And I mean, it's there's magic still exists. Magic still exists in many communities, not just Indigenous communities, but thinking of my own Indigenous communities, there's still magic, there's still spirit, and so the supernatural world still is alive if one spends the time getting to know it. So I think within my own practice, and also having a ceremonial life, those come into the work. Those experiences, become part of the work as much as I'm allowed to bring those things there.
Mm-hmm. And in your work as well, in some of the works you speak to survivance. You've coined survivance. In what ways does your concept survivance impact and influence your work and your life?
I wish I coined survivance, but I did not coin survivance. That was an Ojibwe scholar and a literature major, and I'm slipping my mind right now. If anybody has, Gerald Visner, thank you for people who are listening. That it's Gerald Visner's term, and it's a lovely term. And then I think it was Jamie Isaac now who's brought that forward in a different way with Thrivance. So that we're beyond survival. We've survived, right, after many attempts. But there's some people who are still in survival mode, unfortunately. But there's also communities that thrive, right? So there's a bit of both. So, survivance for me, if we think of, the dreadful histories of government sanctioned, of oppressing people through law, that's what happened here. And that's what happened to my own family. It hurt my family deeply. And so in the 70s, the life expectancy age for Indigenous people was 38, so you wanted to survive, and it was very real. It was brutality that was very real. So survivance is still, it's still happening, but so is thrivance under many, many odds. It's been a rough go sometimes.
Mm-hmm. It really struck me, even looking at the Culture of Belonging series that you have, and the crawling, and the 20 minutes that that the woman you had was crawling, just indicative of those struggles. And yeah, no matter what.
Yeah.
Is there a difference? And if so, how do you understand the difference between making Indigenous art for non-Indigenous people versus making Indigenous art for Indigenous audiences?
Thank you. You asked earlier about who's it made for. I don't know. I think, I've never thought I'm making this for Indigenous people, although I am, and although I know there's work that they'll understand maybe more fully or get it right away, or those kind of things. And, when you think about when art, the artist, whatever, sees it. And then, for me, I work with a lot of people. So, the lone artist genius is a bit of a myth, because I work with sometimes a big crew to take one. In fact, Cultural Belonging, that took like 40 people to make, so it takes a lot of people to make art. And especially, making film or video, but especially these large format works. And then when it's in the studio, and you shoot the work, and then it takes months of test strips and all of these things, and then you bring it out to the world. You take it out of the studio, out of your studio, and for the world to see, and for the audience to see. And that's when you hope that that everybody gets to see it and has their experience with it. And then if we think of the spirit of art, then where the viewer has the experience, and then with that experience, how they bring that forward, because they take it goes from the studio into the museum or the gallery, and then with the viewer, and then art then resides with the viewer. It's with the viewer, and then how they engage with that, and then how they share that with other people as well. So it's the spirit of art is really dynamic.
Mm-hmm. Has your audience shifted since you started to create your art? In other words, do you feel that you're creating for a different audience now?
Well, statistically, Indigenous people don't go to museums a lot. They're not the main, percentage of who goes to museums, right? But I think that museums, particularly in Canada, because of these demands that we put on art, and these demands that we put on our public institutions, is that that art should be for everybody. Art, and so with the kind of educational programs, public programming now, and educational public programming that's in all of Canadian museums. They bring in children from all kinds of communities that they can come and engage with art. And so I think how audience have shifted, it's been through public programming of public institutions, of bringing in more and more children from all walks of life, is one thing. And also, if we think of particularly with the Vancouver Art Gallery, I'm being completely transparent here. I am on their board of trustees, and I've had a show there, and I'm in their collection, and I love them, but it's an extraordinary place of the kind of outreach they do to bring in all kinds of communities. That there's the saying that, our museums are are part of our soul of our cultures, and all of our cultures, or the soul of the city. So what is the role of the museum? And then when they're placing particular art in there. So it's a combination of really what public programming and who they're bringing in to see the work. Family days on Sundays, those kind of things that all families should go to the art gallery.
Thank you. And we have a question from Seema Aluwalia, and she's asking, do you address the co-optation and misuse of Lakota ceremony, which is taking place across this continent and abroad?
Great question. It's a great question. And, some of it's, of course, painful, these are, very, they're very sacred ceremonies, right? That were brought by white buffalo women. These are, really significant ceremonies that keep the people alive as well. And, but at the same time, is that for those cultures that have been criminalized, and even my own ancestors, they went underground. To think we have to use that language, they went underground to protect, these our 7 ceremonies, and they went way out into the bush to continue these things, and to thank goodness that some of these songs that we still have our songs, and certainly with the Lakota, is that we have these things. But for those communities who don't, and they want to have, a spiritual connection, there's that saying that, Great Spirit knows no color, and that the lodge knows no color. But it doesn't mean that people can just come in and exploit it and sell it. I heard that the buffalo sage in California is becoming extinct because people, and you see people smudging on some of these TV shows. And I'm like, what are they doing? Like, you're not even supposed to have the camera on these things, right? So it's challenging, and and also spirituality isn't for sale. Some of the most powerful medicine people I've ever met, these are powerful people that are like shapeshifters, like they're quote poor, they don't have material things, so it's a challenge. Thanks for asking that question.
Yeah, it was actually from Seema's husband, Sikangu from Rosebud.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, just want to acknowledge his presence.
Okay. Thank you.
Let's see, we have another question from our audience here. Have you been part of art explorations making with Indigenous youth, or know of such programs?
I have actually. I was going to show some slides, but I didn't. But well, it's finished now, but it was called the Sioux Project, and thinking about that word Sioux as well. But then we called the further project Tutunka Oyate, which is the Buffalo people. But when I'm in these contexts as a Lakota artist, and at film festivals, and I always think, where are the Sioux artists? Like, because there's so few in Canada, and at the film festivals too. So I did these boot camps for a couple of summers with Sioux youth in Saskatchewan, Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota kids, and we made some videos, and then I made a larger video installation, and so that was fun to do. And then there's actually a book going to come out because I interviewed about 30, it could have been close to 40 Lakota or Dakota or Nakota artists in Saskatchewan. But certainly here in Vancouver, there's the Margot Kane's group, of course, you probably know Full Circle and her training with performing arts. And then Arts Umbrella too has programming for youth as well. And
I see another question coming in for our audience potentially, but just curious, what have maybe, you know, if you could think of one or two things, what have been the most memorable pieces that you've done, or comments or reactions that you've received in your career?
That's an interesting question. Well, I guess there's a couple of things. One was when I made Buffalo Bone China in Saskatchewan, and I wanted to go there and break a set of Royal Albert fine bone china, because during the extermination period of Tatanka buffalo, it was a massacre, right? And of this, incredible being that gave so much. And so I went and smashed the buffalo bone. They weren't buffalo bones, they were cow bones made of fine bone china, and it had to be British fine bone china. And then the installation was up at the MacKenzie Art Gallery. And part of the programming was I was going to have tea with the seniors group, as they were called. And so we were going to have tea, but none of them wanted to use the fine bone china cups. So we ended up having tea in these terrible white styrofoam cups. And one of the old timers said to me, she said, "Did you make this work to make us feel guilty?" And that just crushed me. And I was like, no, I have nothing to do with your guilt. Guilt is internal. Like, deal with your own guilt. Like, I can't make you feel guilty. Like, you're making yourself feel guilty. But, and then we talked about guilt and how guilt might work. But, it was a lovely thing for her to think about. And then another time in one of my films, The Red Paper, and I've worked with Sam Bob, a local Salish actor, for many years. And we had a scene, and it was about starvation, and because people did starve after the buffalo, and then he got into his mood, his moment to make to do the scene, and he shouted, and then one time when it was screened, an Indigenous woman later asked me one of the questions. This is a great question you've asked me. She said, "Why do you have the Indigenous men yelling? Indigenous men don't yell." And then I thought about, all the Indigenous men in my life. I thought, oh, that's true. I've never heard anybody yell, so it just, the way she said that, it was interesting to be asked that. But it was a great theme. It was a great theme, that Sam book. And he doesn't yell at either.
Well, that's such a lovely note to wrap up on. I think we've had our last questions, and it's just been such a pleasure. Thank you so much, Dana, and thank you to our audience for everyone being here today. And I'll turn it over to our chair.
Thank you.
I want to thank Dana for just an amazing conversation, and we will continue to be watching your art and seeing your films, and continue this, hopefully also continue this conversation and exploration of art. I want to say a big welcome to all of our audience, especially your friends from the Lakota Nation who asked the questions, and thank you for the audience for staying. And so before you leave, I promise that there will be a prize draw, and I want to announce the two winners. The first prize is a $150 SFU bookstore prize pack, and it goes to Natasha Patterson. And the second prize is a DoorDash e-voucher or a SFU swag prize worth $50, and it goes to Rosemary Daviduk. And you will be getting an email from SFU Alumni Office to tell you how to claim your prize. So congratulations to both of you. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming to this afternoon's talk, and also for coming to all the other previous presentations President Colloquium talk. If you missed some of them, make sure that you also, I think we will be posting the YouTube links here. You can go back and watch the recording. And obviously, if you want to relive this afternoon's conversation, you can also do that as well. So I want to wish everybody a good evening and thank you so much for coming. And I wish you all a good weekend ahead.
Thank you.